Utah makes maybe the most fascinating quarterback move in the transfer portal cycle. JT Wistrcill, Locked On Utes, joining me here on the show. Sam Huard, the nephew of Brock Huard, who is a phenomenal broadcaster, by the way. I hope he hears that listening to or watching this show, which would be great to know that he's tuning in and whatnot. But he and Jason Benetti, one of the best broadcast tandems in all of college football. But his nephew, Sam, was once upon a time a 5-star quarterback recruit. There aren't that many of those. There are a handful every year. He started at Washington. He was third string on the depth chart. Could have stuck it at. Instead, he went to Cal Poly, an FCS school this last year. Now he's with Utah. JT, I want to start big picture here with you. Your reaction to the Sam Huard news was what?
It's a really, I was excited. I think it's the exact move that you're excited about if you're a Utah fan. Like, you felt good with who was in the room. You have a guy in Brandon Rose who's been a backup here for a few years now. Yes, got hurt last year, but you're like, okay, he's fine. He can do the job. Isaac Wilson had a really good spring ball. So you feel like you have two viable backup options in. But even Kyle Whittingham himself said, we might look around and add a quarterback in the transfer portal. But I, on my own show, just didn't think that was very realistic because who wants to come and be a backup? And apparently Sam Huard does. And I think that is great news for the University of Utah because you are getting a former 5-star guy, a guy who went through it a little bit at Washington, right? Obviously didn't go out playing. That's why he ended up at Cal Poly, biggest guy too. So he had a really successful year too with the Mustangs last year. So coming off that success, then you're a guy who wants to enter the transfer portal. We're talking about a quarterback that last year had over 2,205 yards, 18 touchdowns. Yes, had a few interceptions too, but a proven guy who was second in yards per game and passing touchdowns in the Big Sky last year. So this is a guy who put up big numbers there. He's not walking in to be Utah's starter, but has a chance to be their backup and then compete for the job in 2025. It's the experience type of quarterback that you would really like to have backing up your team. One that's just hard to land in the transfer portal because guys who are entering the transfer portal, they want to start. So I think this is a great get for Utah. It's a proven guy you can throw in there. Whoever else was going to come in for Utah as your backup, outside of Luke Batari, who was kind of the 5th string guy last year, like they hadn't taken live game snaps for Utah. So as good as you maybe feel about them in the program, this is a guy you can go, he's actually been thrown into the fire. He even played in a game at Washington too. It was the Apple Cup. So he's a guy who's been through and in some big moments and big games. Hasn't always gone out great for him like that, but a proven veteran is much better than a young, inexperienced player. I think this is a really good get for Kyle Whittingham and co because they saw what can happen last year when your quarterback room falls apart, and now they have multiple guys who are adequate backups if something happens to Cam Rising.
Yeah, and I think that had to be at the forefront of Kyle Whittingham's mind when this opportunity presented itself. And look, you think about transfer portal additions, and you're a college football fan listening to or watching this show, and you think about adding instant impact guys. They're looking for greener pastures. They want to see the field. They want to prove themselves. They want a different opportunity, a different scheme, whatever, right? You think about guys who are non-developmental pieces. But I think we're starting to see, because the portal is so big and it's so expansive now, this is starting to become a more common phenomenon. You look at Jaden Rashada, for instance. Got beat out by all accounts at Arizona State, and he transfers to Georgia to sit for a year. You look at, it's not specific to quarterbacks. Jason Zandamela, for instance, was a highly touted recruit to USC. He goes to Florida. He's not starting right away at Florida. He's going to be their center of the future. Dante Moore had a struggling year, had a difficult year at UCLA. Where does he go? Oregon. To do what? Sit behind a veteran quarterback with a proven offensive system and great weapons so that he can be a starter in 2025. What sort of chance does Huard have to reach his full potential? Because I talked about him here on the show because it was just such a fascinating name, and it's been such a bizarre, like we've seen 5-star quarterbacks transfer. You got Ty Thompson down at Tulane going into this year as the Green Wave tried to make a push for the college football playoff. You don't see a lot of 5-star. I can't think of another 5-star that dropped down to the FCS level. Yeah. Group of 5, sure, you got Malachi Nelson over at Boise State, but the FCS level, does that kind of put a dampen a little bit on the headline that this generates, which is former 5-star quarterback commits to Utah for the future?
I think it could potentially, but I think the fact that you have a guy who has that much potential has to get you excited. And yes, it didn't work out at Washington, But let's not act like those Washington teams were a quarterback away, right? Like they had to do a full-on tear down. Kalen DeBoer comes in and all the things like that. And then all the excitement and the hype and everything gets rolling from there. So he wasn't the only thing wrong with those Washington teams. So I think that's the first thing you say right there. And, sometimes we love second chance stories in sports, right? Whether it's a guy that one spot didn't work out for whatever the reason may be. And this is his second chance opportunity. And he's got to be fired up to be at the University of Utah too. I mean, we're talking about one of 10 programs that have had a winning season every year in the college football playoff era. So I think it's a great opportunity for him too to succeed rising after this upcoming season. And I think when you're looking at a guy like, why didn't it work in Washington? Like we said, all the other pieces weren't there. Yes, there are going to be a lot of Utah players who depart after this year. It's going to be hard for them. If Utah does what I expect them to do, and I believe they should do, win the Big 12 in their first year, it's going to be hard for them to repeat because they are losing a lot of talent. But they're still going to have a ton of talent, hence the stat I just listed off of why they've had all those 10 winning seasons, right? They've recruited and developed really well. And when they've hit the transfer portal, they found some really quality players too. So, if you're coming to Utah, you're always going to have a good offensive line that's supported by a pretty strong running game. They have invested in the receiver position more than they ever have before. And the tight ends have always been a big staple. Heck, you got a former basketball player who's going to try to be a tight end at Utah now. Things are really crazy over at Rice-Eccles Stadium with a guy in Caleb Lohner coming over to do that, which is just another insane story in of itself. But then especially, let's talk about this. You know what else is a quarterback's best friend? A defense that can give you the ball in a shorter field. The Utah defense was fantastic. It's the biggest reason they were 8-4 in the regular season last year is because of how good that defense was. So if he is able to beat out a Wilson or a Rose in 2025 and be the starter, it's not going to be like, well, Sam Huard has to put the team on his back or this Utah team is going to absolutely crumble. This is not a Caleb Williams USC situation. Kyle Whittingham has built a really strong program that is set up to support and help a quarterback and allows the quarterback to come in and have a chance to succeed, just like a Bryson Barnes was still able to do in part last year. And I think Huard's talent and potential is much higher than what we saw Bryson play at this last fall.
Let's say the worst comes to pass again for Cam Rising and he has to miss a game or two or the season again if an injury were to come about. Now, all reports are that he's healthy going into this year. It's one of the reasons that I've got Utah as the favorites in the Big 12 as well, which Big 12 fans just absolutely love hearing made on podcasts and as far as takes go. So if that were to happen, how confident are you that Sam Huard could lead Utah to a Big 12 championship?
Oh, right. Like this, you said right now?
Yep. Okay. This year. If Rising goes down, let's say Huard wins the backup job and Rising gets hurt again and Huard has to fill in some capacity. How good do you feel about that situation?
That's where I'll be honest and say I don't know if I feel great because that's like right away right now. I think it is a good thing if he has a year to learn and develop under Cam Rising. He's even talked about that, learning from Cam Rising too, right? I believe Sam Huard is better than Bryson Barnes will be. I don't know if it's that much of a leap though, where it's like, okay, you can still win against these quality. And I know these aren't these other teams contending for college football playoff spots more than likely. But if you get in the Big 12 championship game, the other team that's there is if they win the Big 12 championship, they're in the college football playoff. I don't know if he's ready to beat those guys right here, right now. I think that's where it might need a little bit more time. As I mentioned, too, he did throw 10 interceptions. I think Cam Rising is one of the 10 best quarterbacks in college football. I don't believe you lose a guy like that, and I can't confidently predict you to win the Big 12. Is there a way they could? Yeah, because of what I just spent all the last segment explaining, right? Like all of the talent that is on this roster. There's a chance. But man, just especially with how complex this Utah offense is, the last time we saw a guy transfer and try to start right away was Charlie Brewer. This team hit their stride when Charlie Brewer was no longer on the team, and Cam Rising, the guy who's been here, took back over. So that's why I think it'd be really hard for him right away, but give him a year, sit behind Cam Rising, learn the playbook, work with Andy Ludwig, get all of those things right, maximize your potential, and get comfortable with everything. And I think in 2025 is when you could see them be really good. I think if he's thrown in, he can do what Bryson Barnes did. Bryson Barnes beat Washington State back in 2022. That was huge for Utah in their quest to win a Pac-12 championship game and Pac-12 championship. So that is one thing I look and I go, if he needs to come in for a game and win a game against a team that Utah is overall a better team than, I think he could do that. If Sam Huard had to start at Oklahoma State, though, I got to be honest and say I think that the Cowboys would win that in Stillwater because I just think it's really hard to transfer in and maximize the potential of this Utah roster right away. But I do think eventually this in 2025, that could be a different conversation. But as it pertains to right now, if the same thing were to happen next year and Cam Rising gets hurt, I would not consider Utah a Big 12 championship contender.
JT Wistrcill, Locked On Utes. Thank you very much, JT.
Always great, Spencer.
Arizona is in a tough spot, and Arkansas added the strangest transfer I have ever seen. That's coming up next.